Hello there.
Hello there and welcome to another video. In this video I'd like to talk about one of my favourite characters in the Star Wars saga. One bumbling Gungan, the one and only, Jar Jar Binks. I've actually been asked quite a few times why I like Jar Jar so much, and I often comment at length my reasons why. But recently I thought it would be a good idea to compile all my thoughts together into a short-ish video and refer people to this whenever anyone wants to know why Jar Jar is such a good character. I remember seeing a while ago another video about Jar Jar by the channel So Uncivilized, which I thought was fantastic. And it was great to finally see someone else who seemed to really appreciate Jar Jar and his place in Star Wars, instead of just constantly ragging on the guy and writing him off as an irrelevant, annoying, racist sidekick who shouldn't even exist. If you want to watch his video on Jar Jar after this, I'll link it in the description below and you can go and watch that there. I really suggest it. It's a great video. So before we begin, I'll just say that Phantom Menace is my favourite Star Wars movie. It has been all my life, pretty much. I found the characters, particularly Anakin and Jar Jar, so incredibly relatable to 8-year-old me, back when I first watched it on VHS at home. Jar Jar gets a lot of flack, which I feel is very unjustified. And the vast majority of fans tend to overlook the importance of his character, particularly in Episode 1, but also in the subsequent prequels as well. So this is the short essay I wrote that I would send to people to explain why I like Jar Jar Binks so much. He may not be the greatest character in Star Wars, but certainly one of the most misunderstood. Jar Jar is such a tragic figure. He goes from bumbling reject to trusted general after being caught up in an adventure that brings out the best in him. He goes on this odyssey, learns about the galaxy, probably far more than any of his peers stuck in their underwater cities. I love the scene where Jar Jar gets his hand stuck in the pod racer engine, and it's Padme, the Queen of the Naboo, the enemy to his people, who helps him. Great foreshadowing for the eventual coalition at the end of the movie, and a brilliant character moment for both Jar Jar and Padme.
You know, I find that Jar Jar creature to be a little odd.
My marriage.
You're quite right. He's very odd indeed.
Jar Jar and Padme's first scene together is also really important. Up until this point, the Jedi have found Jar Jar a burden, and his own people cast him out. Padme is the first character we see, a human Naboo with whom they do not get along, no less.
We are no like the Naboo. The Naboo think they so smarty. They think their brains so big.
We got a grand army. That's why you know liking us, Mr. Dinks.
Who actually takes a genuine interest in Jar Jar. She speaks to him like an equal, not as a lower sentient species, which she very well could have done, given her upbringing as royalty and the Naboo's disdain for Gungans. But instead she's warm and friendly and makes him feel comfortable to be there, and not that he doesn't belong.
Hello. Sorry. Who, sir, are you, sir?
I'm Padme.
Mr. Jar Jar Binks.
You're a Gungan, aren't you?
Uh-huh.
How'd you end up here with us?
Mine don't know. Mr. Day starting pretty okie day with the brisky morning munchin', then boom! Getting very scared and grabbing that Jedi and pow! Misa here. Huh, Misa getting very, very scared.
This plays into Padme's humility, of course, which is central to her character, and is particularly addressed through her having to act and behave like her own servant. She makes Jar Jar feel included. This is a queen that we already can see is a maverick, someone willing to look past the conceit and stubbornness of her people in hopes of creating a better and kinder world. Jar Jar is the audience insert for the movie, experiencing all these new places and people and cultures for the first time like we are, and it's great to see him grow as a character from the bumbling, exiled outsider wandering the swamps of Naboo to this Gungan who now has friends and companions who don't all turn away from him. This is particularly true of Padme and Anakin, the younger and more tolerant characters in our story, and also Qui-Gon, albeit begrudgingly. We see Jar Jar, who, like the rest of the Gungans, has spent his entire life isolated and cut off, with little to no knowledge of the galaxy beyond the confines of Naboo. He's the first Gungan to travel the galaxy, to visit these new planets and cultures, and experience these new ways of life and customs. He's the fish out of water who finds belonging in a ragtag group of people who see him for who he is and don't chastise and bully him for being different. It's a great message for people of all ages that it's okay to be different, to not just be one of the crowd. And I feel Jar Jar is a very relatable character to many, many people. But it's his friendship with Padme that is the most important aspect of this story. Not only is it symbolic in foreshadowing the coalition later between the Gungans and the humans, it also really helps Padme develop. It's Padme's conversation with Jar Jar alone in her apartment, staring out of her window, unsure of herself and what she should do, and Jar Jar's pride of his culture and its warriors, and that they would be willing to die for a just cause, that's really the most influential thing on Padme in the whole movie. This moment where Padme is her most vulnerable, most unsure of herself and her place in the galaxy, where Jar Jar is the one to make her decide to act against the will of the Senate and return to Naboo to save her people.
You're thinking the people gonna die?
I don't know.
Gungans get pasted too, eh?
I hope not.
Gungans not dying without a fight. We's warriors. We's got a grand army. That's why you no liking us, Mr. Dinks.
I fear by the time you have control of the bureaucrats, Senator, there'll be nothing left of our people, our way of life. I've decided to go back to Naboo.
Go back? But Your Majesty, be realistic, they'll force you to sign the treaty.
I will sign no treaty, Senator. My fate will be no different than that of our people.
The Gungan-Naboo alliance is a huge part of the movie, and its themes of working together to overcome a greater threat, and finding harmony between people whose differences aren't all that. This idea is presented first through Obi-Wan, describing the Gungan-Naboo relationship as a symbiotic circle, where what one does affects the other.
You and the Naboo form a symbiont circle. What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this.
And again, in the way Qui-Gon describes all living things and the midichlorians as symbionts, life forms working together for a mutual advantage.
We are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage.
For being the one who helped this coalition to form by befriending the Queen and creating that bond between cultures, he's honoured with the deserved title of General of the Gungan Army.
You are doing grand. Jar Jar bring Usen and the Naboo together.
No.
So, we shall make you Bombard General.
General?
He may not have much military experience or know-how, but it's the title that matters. It's a bestowed honour. It's the Gungans and Boss Nass recognising all that Jar Jar has done in helping end the feud between the two civilizations and bringing peace once again to Naboo, which is celebrated at the end of the movie. This is also carried over into Attack of the Clones, where we see Gungans milling around in the courtyard of Theed with the humans as equals. He's then appointed as representative of the Gungans to the Senate, because he has the best relations with the Naboo humans, and is good friends with Padme, also now the senator, under whom he learns his politics and basic functions for his role. His naivety and innocence placed him as a perfect representative. One who isn't liable to corruption and would just want whatever is best for his people. Jar Jar doesn't want power, or bribes, or anything like that. However, Palpatine recognises that Jar Jar is naive and can be easily manipulated, and sends Padme away to Naboo to go into hiding so that she leaves Jar Jar in charge of the negotiations for the clone army bill that Padme is adverse to.
I haven't worked for a year to defeat the Military Creation Act, to not be here when its fate is decided.
Knowing that as representative of the only other sentient species of Naboo, that Padme would leave that bill with him.
I'm taking an extended leave of absence. It will be your responsibility to take my place in the Senate. Representative Binks, I know I can count on you.
Misa, I need to be taking on this heavy burden. Misa, accept this with more humility and...
Jar Jar, I don't wish to hold you up. I'm sure you have a great deal to do.
Of course, milady.
By wondering aloud about what Padme would do about this bill if she were here, in the earshot of Jar Jar in his office, it causes the naive and suggestible Jar Jar to act on that.
The Senate will never approve the use of clones before the Separatist attack.
This is a crisis. The Senate must vote the Chancellor emergency powers. He can then approve the creation of an army.
But what senator would have the courage to propose such a radical amendment?
If only Senator Amidala were here.
I haven't worked for a year to defeat the Military Creation Act, to not be here when its fate is decided.
Because Palpatine, so far, is from his home planet. He's a friend of Padme. He's trustworthy to Jar Jar. It causes Jar Jar to act on that, because Palpatine has subconsciously nudged him towards voting him emergency powers by manipulating his trust.
It's clear these separatists made a pact. We said these are Federation betrayed. Senator, fellow delegates, in response to this direct threat to the Republic, Misa proposed that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
Jar Jar is just doing what he thinks Padme would do in this situation. If Padme had been there, Jar Jar wouldn't have been taken in by Palpatine's subtle persuasion.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling. The power you give me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated.
Jar Jar thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's doing what Padme would have wanted, because Palpatine is such a clever manipulator.
I will create a grand army of the Republic to counter the increasing threats of the Separatists.
It is done then.
So Jar Jar votes Palpatine the emergency powers, essentially handing the fate of the galaxy to the Sith Lord and initiating the Clone Wars. Jar Jar, this kind, this innocent, this relatable character, the one who helped bring peace between the two feuding civilizations of the Gungans and Naboo, of Palpatine's own home planet, is now the one to vote emergency powers and start the galactic war which would cause so much death and destruction and devastation for countless billions.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
And seeing Jar Jar head hung mournfully in the funeral procession after Padme's death, it becomes even more heartbreaking. In essence, Jar Jar caused this because he was taken in by Palpatine's manipulation. And had this war not happened, had he not been taken in by Palpatine, then Padme, his friend and mentor, would likely not be dead. What a fantastic, tragic and well-written character, with a true character arc and immense amounts of development. Such an underrated character. And all of this is there in the movies themselves. It's not the most overt character story in the saga, nor is it meant to be. In fact, had the backlash to Jar Jar not been so severe, I would have thought Jar Jar would have played a larger role in the subsequent two prequels, and I'd have really loved to have seen more of his story and have this story more developed and given more prominence in the films. Oh, and one last thing to add here. Ahmed Best is fantastic and an absolute legend. There's a lot more I could say about Jar Jar in this video, and this is by no means a comprehensive list of like all the reasons why I love Jar Jar so much and why he's such a great character. For example, I haven't even talked about the incredible technological leaps that brought Jar Jar to life. In the special effects department, in the acting department from Ahmed Best, there's just so much that really goes into this character that brings him to life in such an amazing way. I may leave that for another video if I have the time, but really I just wanted to focus on Jar Jar's story and his role in the saga and his role in the films, because I'm sure there's also lots of EU and expanded universe material and stuff from the Clone Wars that also adds to all this, but the point of this video was just to look at the original 3 prequel films and just really get down to what Jar Jar is all about. Because people write off Jar Jar as this bumbling, idiot, annoying comic sidekick who doesn't really matter to anything. But Jar Jar is genuinely one of the most important characters in the entire saga. And his story is severely overlooked, and people just put their blinkers on and just think, oh, it's Jar Jar Binks, he must be awful, which isn't the case. And I just wanted a little bit of justice for my boy. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this sort of gushing essay for my love of Jar Jar. I'd like to do more videos like this. I think they're a great thing to do, to really just sort of explore characters or things, particularly about the prequels, which are often overlooked. I love looking at behind the scenes content, and I think it really brings forward a lot of things that people overlook. So this is a really great way of trying to get some of those thoughts out there into the wider public and raise more awareness for the prequels themselves, but also Jar Jar in himself. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Hopefully it won't be too long before my next video, but until then, I'll see you soon.